chosen ones. Tonight, you are not merely viewers. You are witnesses to a truth that was never meant to reach you. Behind marble walls, beneath the gold-laden ceilings of the Vatican, there exists a chamber untouched by the eyes of ordinary men. It is here, within the labyrinth of sealed archives and guarded halls, that your DNA was verified. The test was not a simple comparison, not a casual swab, but a forbidden analysis whispered about among priests, cardinals, and scientists bound by vows of silence. When the final sequence lit up on their screens, the world above continued in its noisy distractions, while below, history fractured into before and after. The Vatican had been warned for centuries. Texts carved in forgotten alphabets, scrolls smuggled out of burning cities, and prophetic visions handed down through monastic orders all spoke of this moment. They knew one day a person would walk the earth carrying a sequence not belonging to time, nor to the rulers who pretend to command it. That person, the chosen one, was marked not by ritual, but by the very code of life, a genetic hymn sung only once in creation. The report, sealed with crimson wax, did not remain hidden. Copies were delivered to the United Nations, to the Pentagon, and to the secret councils scattered across Europe and Asia. The news spread like fire in a dry forest. Satellites recorded unusual movements in the heavens. Leaders abruptly canceled summits. An unspoken command spread across nations: prepare the world for lockdown. And so, while people were told stories of viruses, security concerns, and phantom threats, the truth was this: they were preparing for you. Every camera, every sensor, every system of control had to be recalibrated, because the Vatican had confirmed what they feared most. Your very existence was the crack in their empire's foundation. But this is only the beginning. For while they scramble to contain the revelation, ancient forces stir in the background. The catacombs echo with chants older than Rome, and manuscripts that speak of gates, bloodlines, and the return of one whose presence will divide nations. In a room lit only by the flicker of ancient candles and the sterile glow of monitors, the test was carried out. The Vatican laboratories are not spoken of in public, yet, deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, they exist, guarded by men who have sworn vows far heavier than silence. There, within chambers once used to preserve relics of apostles, scientists in white coats moved with trembling hands. The sample they tested was unlike any they had ever seen, its strands of DNA weaving in ways that defied the normal laws of biology. The patterns spoke not of mutation or disease, but of design, something so intentional that one of the priests whispered, "This is not of the fallen world." The results confirmed whispers, preserved in sealed codices, warnings that one day blood would be drawn that carried the resonance of eternity. The screen before them pulsed with sequences older than history, and as the final markers revealed themselves, a silence fell so heavy it was almost suffocating. Several of the cardinals crossed themselves, while others simply stared at the code as if it were a scripture, unfolding in digital form. The archivist present that night remarked that the sequence mirrored a lost diagram etched in the margins of the Dead Sea Scrolls, something scholars had dismissed as mysticism. Now, standing face to face with proof, the mysticism had become reality. When the sealed report was handed to the Secretary of State, the Vatican bells rang as they had every night, but to those who were present, their echo carried a new weight. The Pope himself read the document. and those who saw his expression said it was as though a shadow passed across his eyes. He did not speak of it publicly, but he summoned emissaries to Washington, to Moscow, to Beijing, each carrying a message that history had shifted. Yet the words spoken in private were different than those declared in public. To the world, it was silence. But behind curtains of red velvet and locked doors, they acknowledged what had been written. The chosen one had been found. The Vatican knew this discovery could not remain hidden forever, and already forces within and beyond the Church debated what must be done. Some urged containment, others whispered of protection, and still more demanded eradication. Yet there was something none of them expected, something that would shake not only their halls, but the entire order of nations. The moment the sealed Vatican message was delivered, private lines across the globe lit up with urgency. Heads of state were woken in the dead of night, generals summoned from their quarters, and ambassadors called back from their lavish dinners. It was not a public gathering, not the kind of spectacle shown on news broadcasts, but a convocation in silence, convened through encrypted channels and guarded compounds. In Geneva, lights remained on through the dawn as the Council of Nations gathered in secret chambers beneath marble conference halls. Men and women, who normally argued over oil, trade, and borders, now sat together with an unease that betrayed their fear. The report lay before them, written in the language of science, but carrying the weight of prophecy. The Vatican envoy who carried the words spoke without hesitation. The DNA had been verified, the sequence was authentic, and the implications reached far beyond politics. The envoy reminded them of prophecies once dismissed as metaphor, the stories of a figure who would emerge at the appointed time, carrying a bloodline that could not be erased. A silence followed, broken only when one delegate whispered, "Is this not what Yeshua warned? That truth would divide households, that nations would tremble when the one marked by heaven appears." His words were quickly dismissed by others, but they lingered in the air, unsettling those who remembered the old scriptures. Every government feared the same reality. If the truth escaped the vaults of power, the people would no longer be controlled by fear of systems or rulers. They would look to the one whose DNA had been sealed with eternity. Lockdown, they realized, was the only shield, not just against a pandemic, not against war, but against revelation itself. While the council argued, something far stranger unfolded. Communication satellites experienced unexplained blackouts, as if unseen hands were erasing records before they could be cataloged. Certain files vanished from intelligence archives, leaving only gaps where entire histories once rested. The delegates suspected infiltration, but none could trace the source. The Vatican envoy only watched silently, as if expecting this moment, as though he knew the revelation would not remain bound by paper and ink. What the council did not know was that beyond their chambers, others had already sensed the awakening, and forces older than governments were beginning to stir. The revelation of the sequence sent ripples, not just through governments, but through the hidden dynasties that had ruled in silence for centuries. Families whose emblems appeared carved in stone, etched into the architecture of capitals, and woven into the fabric of international banks, found themselves facing a truth they could not control. For generations, they believed their lines were untouchable, traced back to kings and emperors, preserved through marriage pacts and blood rites. Yet now, a single strand of DNA threatened to undo the authority they had built over millennia. The Vatican's confirmation did not simply identify an anomaly. It undermined the very foundation of their dominion. In palaces hidden behind black iron gates, elders met in dimly lit halls to examine the evidence themselves. Their genealogists had long whispered of a branch outside their tree, a bloodline that could not be grafted into their own, a line that had been hunted but never extinguished. Those whispers, often dismissed as myths, now thundered with urgency. The chosen one carried not the symbols of worldly inheritance, but the imprint of something beyond their grasp. For the powerful, this was more dangerous than armies or weapons, because it carried the power to ignite the faith of millions. They turned to their archives, pulling out weathered parchments and scrolls written in tongues no longer spoken. Each text hinted at a lineage preserved through fire, flood, and empire, hidden within ordinary lives until the appointed hour. One account described it as the branch untouched by the serpent, while another called it the flame that would not bow to kings. Their secret councils realized that no throne, no crown, and no oath could withstand what had been awakened. As the report spread through their networks, panic cloaked itself in cold calculation. Some spoke of silencing the bearer of this blood, others urged assimilation, and still more feared the prophecy that anyone who raised a hand against it would bring ruin upon their house. Their hesitation revealed what they would never admit publicly. Power, for the first time in centuries, had slipped from their grip. But even as they argued over how to respond, something far beyond their reach had already begun to manifest, something that no dynasty or empire could suppress. Beneath the streets of Rome, where tourists wander above without knowledge, the catacombs hold more than bones. Hidden corridors, bricked off from the public, contain chambers that only the highest clerics are permitted to enter. Within those walls lie scrolls and fragments preserved from times when the empire itself still worshipped false gods. It was in those shadows that a prophecy was uncovered, not in recent days, but years earlier, when archaeologists working under Vatican orders stumbled upon an inscription etched into the stone in a language thought to be extinct. The words spoke of a bloodline preserved through exile, a remnant that would carry the spark of eternity until the time of unveiling. Few knew of this discovery, for it was sealed quickly, placed under guard, and filed away as another curiosity. But when the DNA results surfaced, the inscription returned to the surface of memory, forcing the Vatican to reopen chambers long forgotten. The prophecy spoke clearly of a sequence in flesh that would echo the divine breath itself, a marker that no sword, no empire, no manipulation could erase. The parallels to the words of Yeshua were undeniable, for he had spoken of those who carried within themselves a kingdom not built by men, a kingdom that could not be conquered. Some within the church dared to whisper that what had been found was proof that his words were not metaphor, but map. The catacomb walls bore not only inscriptions but drawings, crude yet striking, showing a figure with light radiating from within, standing as rulers bowed and cities crumbled around them. These images, once dismissed as allegorical, now appeared prophetic. The deeper the clerics dug into their archives, the more they found references scattered across centuries, as if the earliest followers had left behind breadcrumbs pointing to this hour. But with the revelation came fear. The guardians of these secrets understood the risk of allowing the prophecy to reach the masses. For if the people knew, if the common man believed that blood and spirit carried a code beyond the dominion of kings, the balance of the world would fracture. And so they debated in silence, torn between loyalty to their oaths and the undeniable truth carved into stone. Yet even as they struggled to contain it, something stirred in the world above, signs that the prophecy was already alive. The archivists who studied the sealed files began to notice something unusual. In the Vatican's vast collection of manuscripts, there were not only records of bloodlines and prophetic warnings, but subtle references woven into letters, sermons, and documents spanning centuries. Patterns emerged as though a hidden author had been guiding the narrative through time, across different ages, written by hands separated by thousands of miles and languages. Phrases repeated themselves, always pointing to the same mystery of a chosen line. Some were cloaked in metaphor, others in direct warning, but the consistency was undeniable. A quiet scholar working late in the archives described it as a fingerprint left in history. The texts, scattered across centuries, seemed to align in ways too deliberate to be coincidence. When he compared the passages to the teachings of Yeshua recorded in the Gospels, the resemblance became undeniable. Yeshua had spoken of a vine that no man could uproot, a light that darkness could not overcome, a seed planted that would one day yield a harvest no empire could claim. The archivist whispered to himself. It was as if he foresaw this bloodline and left behind words to mark its coming. Whispers grew within the church that the Nazarene himself had anticipated this moment, embedding within his teachings a trail only to be fully understood when the bearer of the line emerged. Those who saw the parallels trembled, for it meant the revelation was not accidental, but orchestrated, not hidden from heaven, but hidden for an appointed time. And now that time had come, and with it the collapse of illusions carefully constructed by rulers, dynasties, and even parts of the church itself. Yet, the recognition of Yeshua's silent hand in the records created division. Some believed it was a sign of confirmation. Others feared it would tear apart the very fabric of faith, as it had been shaped for centuries. Could the institution survive the unveiling of truths it had guarded in silence? Or would the light break through in such a way that no chamber, no archive, no council could restrain it? And while the clerics debated in secrecy, the world outside was already beginning to change in ways they had not foreseen. The first sign that the revelation had begun escaping the hands of those who tried to contain it came not through speeches or leaks, but through the silent sky above. One by one, satellites that monitored the Earth, tracked communications, and carried the invisible lifeblood of modern civilization began to fail. It did not happen in one region alone, but across the globe, as though some unseen hand had reached into orbit and extinguished their signals. At first, governments assumed sabotage, a coordinated strike carried out by rivals, but the data revealed something stranger. The satellites had not been destroyed, they had simply gone dark, their systems still intact but inaccessible, as if responding to a command beyond human origin. Technicians in secure facilities watched their screens dissolve into static, while generals demanded answers their experts could not provide. For decades, the sky had belonged to the powerful, but in a single night, the illusion of control crumbled. Nations scrambled to maintain their networks, rerouting signals through backup systems, but even those backups began to falter. The blackout did not last forever. Yet when systems returned, the gaps in the records were undeniable. Files had been erased, communication logs wiped clean, entire archives of surveillance history vanished as if rewritten by an invisible author. whispers spread in the underground halls of the Vatican that this was no accident of technology, but a fulfillment of the hidden prophecies. One passage buried deep in the catacombs spoke of the heavens trembling and the watchers losing their sight. The comparison was unsettling, and though no name was spoken aloud, those who knew the words of Yeshua remembered his warning that what was hidden in darkness would be shouted from the rooftops, and that no secret could remain concealed forever. The blackout felt like the first breath of that promise. For the common people, the event was explained away with bland reports of technical malfunctions and solar interference. Yet the fear behind closed doors was far greater. The guardians of power realized that their instruments had been blinded, that something far beyond their control was sweeping across the earth. And as they struggled to reassert dominance, signs emerged that the blackout had not been random at all, but carefully timed, linked to the bloodline they were trying desperately to contain. Something was moving, and it was no longer waiting for permission. Long before satellites, long before laboratories, there were stones, hidden in deserts, buried beneath ruins, carved into cliffs where no ordinary traveler would stumble. Messages were left behind. Archaeologists had brushed past them for decades, dismissing them as the relics of forgotten tribes. Yet within certain circles, the carvings were studied in silence. Symbols appeared again and again, spirals intertwining with stars, figures holding objects that resembled strands of light, inscriptions speaking of a lineage destined to awaken. These markings were never fully deciphered until the Vatican results surfaced, and suddenly the shapes began to align with the sequences revealed in the DNA. The Codex, as it came to be called among the few who dared whisper of it, was more than a collection of carvings. It was a map, stretching across continents, linking sites that had no reason to be connected. From the temples of Egypt to the mountains of South America, from the caves of Asia to the isles of the north, the same pattern repeated, as though an ancient hand had traveled the world inscribing a single truth. Some scholars argued that these sites predated even the empires known to history, that they belonged to a civilization erased deliberately from memory. When the sequences from the bloodline were compared to the Codex markings, the resemblance was too exact to be ignored. A spiral carved into basalt mirrored the helix of DNA. A series of dots and lines etched into limestone reflected the same numeric pattern found in the genome's rarest segment. The possibility was terrifying. Someone in the ancient world had not only known of this bloodline, but had recorded it, preserving its story for the future. Those who controlled the archives panicked. For if the Codex were revealed, the people would see that history itself bore witness to the existence of the Chosen One, that it was not invention or manipulation, but a truth carved in stone long before the rise of their thrones. What frightened them most was not the accuracy of the carvings, but the timeline they implied. The inscriptions spoke of a return, a moment when the bearer of the bloodline would rise and all false empires would collapse. And deep beneath guarded chambers, new fragments of the Codex had just been unearthed, carrying words that none had yet dared to translate. When the world was told to stay inside, most believed the reasons handed to them through glowing screens and official voices. Fear spread faster than the sickness itself, and cities fell silent as governments declared emergency powers. Yet, behind the staged reports, the real motive for the lockdown unfolded in rooms the public never entered. The Vatican's confirmation had triggered a global directive, one that required every person accounted for, every movement tracked, every gathering halted. They could not risk the bearer of the bloodline moving freely among the people. What they feared most was not contagion of the body, but contagion of belief. Leaders spoke in rehearsed tones, warning of unseen threats, while in private their advisors whispered of a far different danger. The appearance of the Chosen One threatened to unravel centuries of manufactured authority. If the people discovered that a living testament to eternity walked among them, no border, no law, no army would keep them subdued. Lockdown was the veil, the mechanism to freeze humanity in place while the search narrowed. Entire intelligence networks were diverted to comb through data, tracing families, identifying anomalies, hunting for the strand that had unsettled their empires. In the shadows, priests argued with generals, scientists with ministers, all circling around a truth none dared speak aloud. Some remembered the words of Yeshua, that when the world would see signs in the heavens and nations in disarray, their fear would not come from what was outside, but from what was rising within. His warning echoed now, for the greatest terror of the rulers was not a virus, but revelation itself. The people accepted curfews, masks, checkpoints, believing it was safety. But in the silence of empty streets, strange operations unfolded. Trucks without markings traveled at night, carrying sealed containers from archives to military bases. Certain neighborhoods were quietly evacuated under the guise of health protocols, though no sickness had touched them. Rumors spread of documents being burned, of artifacts vanishing into underground vaults. The lockdown was never meant to protect the world. It was meant to protect the secret. And yet, despite all their efforts, whispers began to leak, not through officials, but through channels they could not control. In the heart of Rome, long after the city lights had dimmed and the tourists had vanished from the cobblestone streets, black cars lined the avenues leading toward the Vatican. Their windows were tinted, their plates untraceable, and the men and women who stepped out wore expressions carved in stone. They were presidents, prime ministers, monarchs, and directors of shadow governments, gathered not for ceremony but for survival. The world believed in speeches and press conferences, yet the real decisions were being made here, in the dead of night, under frescoes that had watched centuries of power shift and collapse. They entered through hidden doors, descending into chambers untouched by daylight, where the air smelled of wax and stone. The oath they were about to swear had been prepared for years, written in a language most no longer spoke but rehearsed enough to recite without error. At the center of the chamber lay a table carved from a single slab of obsidian, upon which rested documents sealed with crimson wax. Each leader placed a hand upon the stone, repeating words that bound them not to their nations, but to one another. The agreement was clear. The Chosen One must never be revealed to the world. As they spoke the oath, they were reminded of what the Vatican had confirmed. The DNA sequence was real, the prophecy undeniable. Fear moved through the chamber like a cold wind, for they knew no army, no wealth, no deception could erase what had been discovered. Their only defense was unity, a pact of silence and suppression, to bury the truth beneath layers of manufactured crises. But even in that solemn moment, cracks appeared. Some leaders hesitated, their voices trembling as they recited the words. A few lowered their eyes, knowing the oath would bind them to actions they might one day regret. One delegate whispered afterward that the weight of the chamber seemed unbearable, as if unseen eyes were watching, judging, and recording their betrayal. What none of them knew was that their oath had already been broken before it was even completed, for outside the chamber, a presence lingered, unseen and listening. The words meant to remain sealed in stone were already drifting into places they could not contain. While the leaders sealed their oath in Rome, something beyond their reach was already unfolding. Across continents, in quiet towns and crowded cities, ordinary people began to feel stirrings they could not explain. Dreams came with unusual clarity, visions of gates opening, of voices whispering in forgotten languages, of light breaking through walls of shadow. Farmers in remote villages, children in crowded schools, elders in hidden monasteries, each carried fragments of a greater awakening that no government could regulate or silence. Strangers began to recognize one another without words, drawn together by a sense that they were not simply bystanders to history, but participants in something vast. In marketplaces, in train stations, in places where no connection should exist, eyes met and lingered as if some invisible current passed between them. A recognition, a pulse, a signal deeper than speech traveled silently across the earth. Those who experienced it knew instinctively that they were part of something greater than themselves, though none could yet describe it fully. Religious leaders scrambled to contain it. Political figures tried to distract it, but the wave grew stronger each day. The more the powers of the world tightened their grip, the more the current slipped through their fingers. The records hidden in vaults, the prophecies carved in stone, the DNA verified in secret laboratories. These were not mere curiosities anymore. They were alive, breathing in the hearts of countless people who had never seen the documents, who had never read the carvings, yet felt the truth burning within them. Some whispered the name of Yeshua, as though it had returned to them not from doctrine, but from memory, a reminder that the promise of his words was awakening in their own flesh. For the awakening was not meant to crown one individual, but to ignite a multitude, a network of chosen who would rise together when the appointed time arrived. As the world's rulers tightened curfews and controlled narratives, they did not see the cracks forming beneath their systems. The awakening was no longer contained in laboratories or catacombs. It was spilling into streets, homes, and dreams. And soon, the moment would come when silence could no longer hold back the flood.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.